My friends, I want to begin tonight by gently taking apart a word you have been using your whole life. A word so familiar, so worn in, so harmless sounding, that you have probably never stopped to look at it directly. The word is imagination. When I say that word to you, certain pictures rise. You think of children playing make-believe. You think of daydreams. You think of art and stories. You think of the soft, drifting, slightly indulgent activity people do when they are not being serious. Imagination, in the ordinary sense of the word, is something you associate with childhood, with creativity, with leisure, with the realm of the unreal. It is what the mind does when it is not paying attention to real things. It is in our culture almost a synonym for not real. If I were to say to you, that is just your imagination, you would understand me immediately. I would mean, that is not real, that is in your head, that has no weight in the actual world. And here is where we are going to have to part company with everything you have been taught. Because imagination is not what you think it is. Imagination is not the soft, harmless, leisure time activity of an idle mind. Imagination is not the dreamy cousin of reality. Imagination is not the place where unreal things live. Imagination is the source. Imagination is where everything that has ever entered the visible world came from first. Imagination is not what your mind does when it is not engaged with reality. Imagination is what creates reality continuously beneath every moment of your life. And the reason you do not see this is the same reason a fish does not see water. You are inside the medium that is doing the work, and from inside it, the work is invisible. Tonight I am going to show you what imagination actually is. Not as poetry, not as inspiration, as mechanism, as the engine your life has been running on the whole time. And by the end, you will see why the law of assumption, properly understood, is not a technique you do to your imagination. It is the recognition that imagination is already doing it, and your only real task is to choose what it is doing on purpose. Let me start by telling you what happened to this word, because the misunderstanding is not your fault. For most of human history, imagination was treated as something close to sacred. Across nearly every wisdom tradition, the image-making faculty of the human being was understood as the most important and most powerful thing about us. It was the place where the divine met the human. It was the seat of vision, prophecy, creation, transformation. To imagine something was to bring it close to being. The imaginal realm was not a lesser version of the real world. It was understood as the source of the real world, the place reality came from before it appeared. And then, gradually, over the last few hundred years, the word lost its weight. As the modern world became more materialist, more focused on the visible and the measurable, the word imagination was demoted. It became associated with children, with daydreaming, with fantasy. The serious adult was supposed to put it aside, the way one puts aside toys, in favor of reality, meaning the hard, visible, external world. And so the most powerful word in the human vocabulary, a word that used to mean the engine of creation, became a word that meant not real. The faculty that the ancients called the meeting place of human and divine became, in modern speech, the soft place where unserious people went to escape the real. This is one of the greatest reversals in the history of language. And it is one of the reasons people struggle so much with the law of assumption. Because when teachers in this tradition say imagination creates reality, the modern listener hears it through the modern meaning of the word. They hear daydreaming creates reality. They hear make-believe creates reality. And of course that sounds absurd. Of course that sounds like a magical claim. Because in the modern sense of the word, imagination is precisely the thing that is not real, and saying that the not real creates the real is, on the face of it, nonsense. But that is only because the word has been stolen from you. When the older teachers used the word imagination, they did not mean what you mean by it. They meant something deeper, more powerful, more foundational. They meant the inner image-making activity that precedes and produces everything that ever enters the outer world. They meant the causal layer of reality. They meant the source of what becomes the visible. Tonight I want to give you that older meaning back, because once you have it, The law of assumption stops sounding like a strange spiritual claim and starts sounding like the simple, mechanical description of how things actually work. Let me show you, with a very ordinary observation, that imagination is causal and not decorative. Look around you, wherever you are, the chair you are sitting in, the clothes you are wearing, the walls of the room, the phone or screen in front of you, the light fitting above your head, the cup on the table, the bed you will sleep in tonight. Now ask yourself a simple question. Did any of these things exist before someone imagined them? No, not one of them. Every single object in your visible environment, without exception, existed first as an inner image in someone's mind before it ever entered the physical world. The chair existed in the imagination of the designer before the carpenter shaped a single plank. The clothes existed in the mind of someone who pictured them before any fabric was cut. The walls of your room existed in the imagination of an architect before any foundation was poured. The phone in your hand was, decades ago, an inner image in the imagination of an engineer, refined and refined inwardly, before a single component existed in the world. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal order of operations. Image first, object later. Inner first, outer later. Imagination first, reality later. The visible world is, without exception, the aftermath of inner images. The thing in your hand is the late arriving echo of someone's earlier act of imagining. Now, if this is obviously true for chairs and phones and buildings, for things, what makes you think it is any less true for the conditions of your life? Your life is not made of objects. It is made of conditions, relationships, situations, atmospheres, outcomes. And those, every single one of them, emerge from inner images first and outer manifestation later, exactly as the chair emerged from the designer's inner image first and the physical chair later. The conditions of your life are downstream of inner images. The relationships you have are downstream of inner images. The atmosphere of your days is downstream of inner images. Not because reality is magical, because reality is consistent. The same order of operations that produce the chair produces your life. Inner first, outer later. The only difference is, for the chair, someone else did the imagining. For your life, you are doing it, continuously. Whether you know it or not, whether you mean to or not, imagination is not something you switch on when you decide to manifest. Imagination is the engine that has been running underneath your life from the moment you began having an inner life at all. And what it has been imagining is what your life has been becoming. This is what the older teachers meant when they said imagination is the source. Not that imagination is the most creative human activity. That imagination is the causal layer of reality. That the visible world is the printed result of imaginal cause. That nothing arrives in the outer world that was not first held in an inner image. You are not separate from this process. You are not standing outside of it, choosing whether to participate. You are inside it, generating images continuously, and your outer life is being generated continuously in response. The only real question is, what images are you generating, and are you generating them on purpose? So let me now define imagination properly, not in the soft modern sense, but in the precise causal sense that this teaching actually requires. Imagination is the inner activity of holding an image, a state, a feeling, or a self, with such consistency and reality that it begins to behave as if it is true. Let me unpack that, because every word matters. Imagination is inner activity. It does not happen in the outer world. It happens in the inner chamber of your own awareness, in the place where you can picture, feel, sense, and inhabit. This inner chamber is not a separate room from your daily life. It is the constant background of your daily life. You are always inwardly imagining something. You never stop. Even when you think you are not imagining, you are quietly, unconsciously in the background. The inner activity does not pause. It only changes content. Imagination is the holding of an image, a state, a feeling, or a self. This is critical because most people, when they hear the word imagination, think only of pictures. But the imaginal activity is much wider than visual imagery. You imagine, in the deeper sense, every time you hold an inner state. I am someone who. You imagine every time you hold a feeling about a situation. This is going to be hard. You imagine every time you carry an inner posture into a moment. I am the kind of person who is overlooked here. These are imaginal acts. They are not pictures. They are inhabitings. And they are far more powerful than mere visual imagery, because the inhabiting reaches into every layer of your being, not just the visual one. Imagination requires consistency and reality. This is where the older meaning becomes very different from the modern meaning. A fleeting daydream is not, in the older sense, an act of imagination, or rather, it is a very weak one. The imaginal act that moves reality is the one that is held with the inner conviction of something already real, not pictured as a goal, inhabited as a fact, not entertained as a possibility, carried as a settled state. The depth of the inhabiting, not the vividness of the picture, is what gives the imaginal act its causal weight, and imagination begins to behave as if it is true. This is the strange, wonderful, almost embarrassing part. The inner image, once held with enough consistency and inner reality, does not stay inner. It becomes operationally real. It shapes your perception. It shapes your behavior. It shapes how others respond to you. It shapes what arrives in your life. Slowly at first, then faster, then completely, the inner image moves outward through every layer of your existence until the outer world is rearranged to match. Not because reality is magical, because the inner image is genuinely causal, and given enough time, causality completes its work. This is what imagination actually is. Not a daydream, not a wish, not a hope. The disciplined inner inhabiting of an image, state, feeling, or self with such consistency and reality that it becomes operationally true. And in that older, deeper sense of the word, imagination has been the engine of your life from the very beginning. The only question is whether you are operating it deliberately or unconsciously. I want to show you now, gently but precisely, why your life looks the way it does. Because once you understand imagination correctly, the explanation becomes obvious, and once it is obvious, it becomes useful. You have been imagining all along. You have not been imagining badly. You have been imagining constantly, in every unfocused moment, with the full causal weight of the inner activity. And what you have been imagining is exactly what your life has been delivering. But here is the catch. You have not been imagining what you want. You have been imagining what you fear, what you expect, what you assume, what you remember, and what you have been told. Those have been the dominant inner images. Those have been the inhabitings your imagination has been holding most steadily. And those, faithfully, mechanically, have been producing the outer conditions of your life. When you spend an unfocused moment running through the way the difficult conversation tomorrow is going to go badly, you are not just worrying. You are imagining. You are inwardly inhabiting a scene in which it goes badly, with vivid detail, with felt anticipation, with full inner reality. And the imaginal act has its consequence. Your nervous system primes itself for the bad outcome. Your perception in the actual conversation scans for confirmation. Your behavior subtly invites the very dynamic you imagined. And the other person, reading you, responds to the inner state you walked in carrying. The conversation goes badly, and you call it a confirmation of your worry. It was not a confirmation, it was a production. You imagined it into being. When you spend years inwardly carrying the inhabiting I am someone things go wrong for, you are not just having low self-esteem. You are imagining. You are inwardly inhabiting that self with full reality in every unguarded moment. And the imaginal act produces. Your life delivers events that match the self you are inhabiting. Not because the universe is cruel, because imagination is causal, and the self you are inhabiting most consistently is what your imagination is producing. When you scroll through your phone and absorb image after image of how other people's lives look better than yours, you are not just consuming content, you are imagining. You are inwardly inhabiting the state of someone who is behind, someone who is missing out, someone whose own life is somehow less. The imaginal act has its consequence. You begin to perceive your own life through the lens of that inhabiting, and your life begins to deliver faithfully the experience of being behind that you have been imagining. This is the great quiet tragedy of unexamined inner life. People imagine all day the very thing they say they do not want, and then they wonder why what they say they want never arrives. The wanting was a small voice, the imagining was the constant broadcast, and the imagining, not the wanting, is what reality responds to, always. So when teachers in this tradition say, change your imagination and change your life, what they mean, in the precise sense, is change what you are inwardly inhabiting in the unguarded moments, and your life will follow, because your life is already following. It has been following the whole time. You have just been pointing your imagination at the very thing you were trying to escape. The good news in this is enormous. If imagination is causal, and you have been imagining the wrong things, you have not failed at manifesting, you have in fact succeeded at manifesting perfectly the inhabitings you were running. The system works, it has been working. You have been getting exactly what you imagined. The only adjustment needed is to begin imagining, deliberately, what you actually want to live. Let me now give you the practical teaching, because the philosophy without the practice is just a beautiful idea, and beautiful ideas do not change lives. Practice does. If imagination is the engine, and imagination is always running, then your task is not to start imagining, it is to direct the imagining that is already happening. Here is how that actually works. First, recognize that you are imagining right now. This is the foundational shift, not in some special future moment when you sit down to do imagination work. Right now, as you read these words, as you go through your day, your imagination is producing content constantly beneath every action. The moment you can see that, you stop being passive inside the imaginal stream and start being able to steer it. Second, choose the inhabiting, not just the picture. Most people, when they try to use imagination on purpose, picture the thing they want. They visualize the house, the partner, the body, the outcome. Pictures are fine, but pictures alone are weak. The causal weight is in the inhabiting. So instead of merely picturing the result, inwardly be the version of you for whom the result is already true. Take on their inner state, their carriage, their casual sense of course. Inhabit the self that has it, not just the scene that contains it. The inhabiting is the imagination that moves reality. The picture is just the scenery around the inhabiting. Third, hold the inhabiting with reality, not with strain. This is the subtle part. The imagining that works is not the imagining you do with clenched teeth, willing it to be true. That kind of imagining contains, hidden inside it, the inhabiting of this is not yet true and I am trying to force it. And that hidden inhabiting is what reality responds to. The imagining that actually moves things is the imagining you do casually, with the inner posture of someone for whom the thing simply is. Not strained certainty, settled normality, the texture of course. When you can imagine something with that inner texture, you have done the imaginal act in the older, deeper sense, and reality begins, in its own time, to rearrange. Fourth, use the small, unguarded moments. Imagination, like the default mode network of your brain, is shaped by what fills the unfocused moments of your day. The few minutes of deliberate imaginal work in the morning matter less than the hundreds of small, unguarded moments throughout the day. So weave the new inhabiting into those moments. The kettle, the cue, the breath between tasks, the walk to the car. In each one, briefly, for a few seconds, inhabit the version of you for whom what you want is already true. These small inhabitings, accumulated across the day, are how the new image becomes the dominant one. Not by force, by frequency. Fifth, use the threshold of sleep. The last minute before sleep is the most imaginal minute of your entire day. The conscious mind softens. The auditing voice quiets, and whatever inner image you carry across the threshold sinks deep into the layer where reality is actually generated. Use it deliberately. In the final minute before sleep, inhabit for 60 seconds the inner state of the version of you who already has what you want, not the picture, the state. Carry it into sleep. Let the imaginal act do its causal work in the dark while you rest. This single minute, repeated nightly, may move more reality than an hour of effort during the day. And sixth, do not check. The hardest part of imaginal work is that once you have done it, you have to leave it alone. You have to let it run its causal course without constantly digging up the seed to check on the roots. Imagine and walk away. Imagine and live. Imagine and trust. The imagining is the act. The arrival is the law. Your job is to inhabit, not to monitor. The watched pot, as they say, does not boil, and the constantly audited imagining does not complete. Plant, walk on. This is the entire practice. There is no further secret. The older teachers were not hiding anything from you. They were telling you, in language we had forgotten how to hear, that imagination is the engine, that you are imagining now, and that all you have ever needed to do is to imagine on purpose, in the unguarded moments, with the inner texture of course, and then let the law do what the law always does. So here is what I want you to take with you tonight, into every unguarded moment of tomorrow. Imagination is not what you have been told it is. It is not soft, it is not idle, it is not unreal, it is not the cousin of fantasy. It is the engine, it is the causal layer, it is the source from which the visible world emerges, continuously, beneath every moment of your life. The chair you are sitting in came from imagination, the room around you came from imagination, and the conditions of your life, every relationship, every opportunity, every outcome, are coming just as faithfully from the inner images you have been holding. You have not been failing at manifesting. You have been imagining the wrong things brilliantly, consistently, with full causal effect. The system works. It has been working. You have simply been pointing it at the very things you wanted to escape, because no one ever taught you that the inhabiting in the unguarded moments was the actual broadcast. Tonight, that ends. Tonight, you take the engine back, not by trying harder, not by visualizing more dramatically, not by adding another technique to the pile, by simply remembering in the small ordinary moments that you are imagining and quietly, gently choosing what you imagine, by inhabiting in the breath before sleep the version of you for whom what you want is already real, by weaving the new inhabiting through the kettle, the cue, the unguarded breath, with no strain, no drama, no performance, only the casual inner texture of course, this is who I am, and of course, this is what my life is. Imagination is not what you think it is. It is something far more powerful than the word has been allowed to mean. And once you remember its older meaning, the whole law of assumption becomes simple, not a magical claim, a mechanical description. The inner first, the outer later, the image first, the thing later, the inhabiting first, the condition later. Every time, without exception, the world you live in is the late arriving echo of what you have been inwardly inhabiting. And what you inwardly inhabit starting tonight can be different from what you have been inhabiting all your life. Not all at once, quietly, repeatedly, in the unguarded moments, with the inner texture of course. Your imagination has been creating your life from the very beginning. The only question that has ever mattered is, what is it creating? And is it creating on purpose? Tonight, you choose, and reality, faithful as ever, begins in its own time to follow. Thank you and good evening. This is Best of Lectures. I will see you in the next video.